In 1935, the founder of modern Turkey secretly sent an ambassador to Mexico with a single mission: find proof that a sunken continent in the Pacific Ocean was the true birthplace of human civilization, and that the Turks came from it. That ambassador spent 3 years photographing ruins, collecting notes, and filling 14 classified reports. Some of those documents have never been fully published, and the man who inspired the whole search claimed he had translated a set of ancient tablets that to this day no other human being has ever been allowed to see. This is the story of Mu, the continent that supposedly gave birth to every civilization on Earth, and then vanished beneath the waves 12,000 years ago. Stay until the end, because the strangest part of this story isn't the lost continent, it's who believed in it. Our story begins with a British Army officer named James Churchward, stationed in India in the 1870s. Officially, he was there to serve the empire. Unofficially, he became obsessed with Sanskrit, ancient scripture, and the deep past of the subcontinent. According to Churchward's own account, and this is important because almost everything that follows rests on his word alone, he met a Hindu priest who taught him to read a forgotten script called Naacal. Over years of study, Churchward claimed he was shown a set of ancient clay tablets describing a vanished motherland, a continent called Mu, sitting somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, home to an advanced civilization of some 64 million people. Churchward later wrote 5 books, laying out what these tablets supposedly said. Mu, in his telling, was the original cradle of humanity, older than Egypt, older than Sumer, older than any civilization we officially recognize. Its people worshipped a single sun god, understood engineering we still can't fully explain, and sent out colonies across the globe that would one day become the Egyptians, the Mayans, and the Uyghurs of Central Asia. Then, around 12,000 years ago, catastrophic volcanic activity caused the entire continent to sink in a single night. And that event, Churchward argued, is the real origin of every flood myth on Earth. Here's the problem, and we have to be honest about it. Nobody besides Churchward ever saw the Naacal tablets. When skeptics pressed him to produce them, or to name the exact monastery where he studied, he always gave the same answer, that he had sworn an oath of secrecy to his teacher. No location, no second witness, no photograph of an original tablet. That doesn't automatically make the story false, but it does mean that everything built on top of it, every map, every diagram, every translation, rests on a single, unverifiable claim. Keep that in mind, because it becomes important later. Before Churchward published a single word about Mu, a very different kind of researcher was already digging through the jungles of Mexico. His name was Augustus Le Plongeon, and unlike Churchward, he didn't just write about ruins, he lived in them. Le Plongeon and his wife Alice spent years physically excavating Chichén Itzá in the 1870s and 1880s. He photographed structures no one had documented before, mapped temple layouts, and attempted his own translations of Maya glyphs, decades before modern epigraphy existed as a discipline. Whatever else is true about him, Le Plongeon put in the fieldwork. That's not nothing. It was Le Plongeon who first connected the word Mu to a Maya manuscript now known as the Madrid Codex, which he referred to as the Troano manuscript, translated a decade earlier by a French scholar named Charles-Étienne Brasseur de Bourbourg. Le Plongeon claimed the codex described a great land that split apart and sank beneath the sea, killing millions, a passage he tied directly to the myth of Atlantis, and eventually to Mu. There's a twist here that most viewers never hear. Brasseur de Bourbourg's original translation of the Codex is now considered badly flawed by modern scholars. The script wasn't fully understood at the time, and a number of the facts people quote from it, including the specific casualty numbers and the dramatic flood narrative, trace back to a mistranslation rather than the actual content of the manuscript. Le Plongeon built an entire mythology on a foundation that even sympathetic historians now consider shaky, and yet he kept using the name Mu for the rest of his life, and so did Churchward, who borrowed the term directly from him. If Churchward provided the mythology and Le Plongeon provided the name, it was a Mexico-based prospector named William Niven who provided something the theory desperately needed: physical evidence. Niven spent decades combing central Mexico for minerals and antiquities, and over the years he reported finding thousands of stone tablets, statuettes, and artifacts buried in ash layers near Mexico City. He sold and donated pieces to collectors and museums for years. Churchward would later lean heavily on Niven's finds, presenting some of them as physical confirmation of the Naacal script and of an ancient cataclysm. The trouble is that mainstream archaeologists who examined Niven's tablets came to a very different conclusion: that many of the markings were either natural erosion patterns, later additions, or outright modern fabrications, possibly created to satisfy a buyer's market that was hungry for exactly this kind of proof. Niven's own excavation records were also notoriously inconsistent. None of that erases the fact that real, undisputed pre-Columbian artifacts did pass through his hands. But it does mean the specific pieces used to support the Mu narrative are, at best, contested. Here's where the story stops being a Western curiosity and becomes something much stranger. It reached the desk of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the founder of the modern Turkish Republic. In the early 1930s, Atatürk was deep into a nation-building project called the Turkish History Thesis, an attempt to trace Turkish origins back to the earliest civilizations on the planet. When a retired general named Tahsin Bey brought him Churchward's books and pointed out apparent similarities between ancient Turkic symbols and the ones Churchward attributed to Mu, Atatürk didn't dismiss it. He acted on it. Churchward himself was invited to Ankara and reportedly had dinner with Atatürk at Çankaya. Soon after, Tahsin Bey was appointed as Turkey's envoy to Mexico, officially a diplomatic post, but with a very unofficial mission: investigate possible links between the Maya language and Turkish and see whether the Maya could be descendants of Mu's colonies, just like the Turks supposedly were. Over roughly 3 years, from 1935 to 1937, Tahsin Bey, who was given the surname Mayatepec by Atatürk himself, after Tepek, a Maya word he believed matched the Turkish word for hill, filed 14 separate reports. Together, they filled 3 bound volumes of notes, sketches, and photographs, some of which reportedly remained in the Turkish Language Association's archive for decades before one volume went missing entirely. Atatürk read these reports closely, even as his health declined, and some of the linguistic comparisons fed into his broader Sun language theory, presented at Turkish language congresses in the mid-1930s. But the collaboration cooled. According to several historical accounts, Mayatepec's later reports pushed into territory well beyond language, including claims connecting Mu to Islamic theology. And Atatürk, increasingly skeptical, began distancing himself from the project. After Atatürk's death in 1938, the research was quietly shelved. So why does Mu keep resurfacing, generation after generation? Partly because of genuine archaeological mysteries that have nothing to do with Churchward at all: megalithic sites, like Nan Madol in Micronesia, built from an estimated 1,000,000 tons of basalt with no clear historical explanation for how it was transported. The underwater formations off Yonaguni, Japan, still actively studied by researchers like Professor Masaki Kimura. And the isolation of Easter Island, 3,500 kilometers from the nearest landmass, somehow settled and monumentalized by people traveling in open canoes. None of these sites prove Mu existed, but they do show real, unresolved gaps in how ancient engineering and ancient seafaring worked, gaps that make a story like Mu feel more plausible than it might otherwise. So where does that leave us? We have a soldier who claimed to read a language no one else has ever seen, a field archaeologist who built a legend on a flawed translation, a prospector whose evidence is disputed by the very institutions that examined it, and a national leader who took the whole idea seriously enough to fund a diplomatic mission around it. That's not nothing, but it's not proof either. What we're left with is a paper trail of ambition, genuine fieldwork, some very real archaeological puzzles, and at least one very large, very unverifiable claim sitting at the center of it all. Maybe one day, deep-sea archaeology in the Pacific will settle this for good. Until then, Mu remains exactly what it's always been, a story that's too well documented to dismiss outright, and too thin on hard evidence to accept at face value. Sources and further reading are linked in the description. If you want a deeper dive into any one thread of this story, Le Plongeon's excavations, Niven's disputed tablets, or the full Mayatepec reports, let me know in the comments. See you next week.